The unexpected incident. It was a bright, bustling afternoon at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the busiest hub in the United States. The terminal was alive with the sounds of announcements, rolling suitcases, and the chatter of travelers from all walks of life. Among the sea of faces, one man stood out, not because of any dramatic gesture or loud proclamation, but for his calm, composed demeanor. Nathan Ellis, a corporate lawyer, had just wrapped up a grueling week of negotiations in Atlanta. His tailored navy suit, polished shoes, and the neatly folded pocket square gave him an air of quiet authority. With his carry-on bag in one hand and his boarding pass in the other, he navigated the crowd with purpose. He was heading home to New York on a first-class ticket that his company had graciously provided. Reaching Gate B-17, Nathan handed his ticket to the smiling gate agent, who scanned it and waved him toward the jet bridge. He offered a polite nod in return and made his way down the narrow passage. As he boarded the aircraft, the first-class cabin greeted him with its familiar aura of luxury. The scent of fresh leather and brewed coffee mingled with the faint hum of air conditioning. He spotted his assigned seat -2A, a window seat, placed his bag in the overhead compartment, and settled in. Nathan adjusted his tie, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a hardcover book. The title, The Power of Calm Negotiation, seemed fitting for someone in his line of work. As he flipped through the pages, the cabin began to fill with passengers. Some glanced at him briefly before continuing to their seats, while others stowed their bags with the hurried precision of frequent flyers. Just as the last trickle of passengers boarded, a flight attendant entered the cabin, clipboard in hand. She was tall, with sharp features, and a name tag that read Linda. Her uniform was immaculate, and she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who had spent years in the industry. As she surveyed the rows, her eyes fell on Nathan. Without preamble, she approached him. Her voice, though controlled, carried a certain edge. "Excuse me, sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Nathan glanced up from his book, slightly taken aback. "Of course," he replied calmly, retrieving the pass from his jacket pocket. Linda studied the pass intently, her brows furrowing. After a long moment, she handed it back with a tight smile. "It seems there might be an issue with the seating arrangement. I'll need to double-check with our system." Nathan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she disappeared toward the galley. Around him, a few passengers exchanged curious glances, their attention briefly piqued. Minutes later, Linda returned, her expression more resolute. "Sir," she began, her tone firmer now, "there's been a mistake. I'm going to have to ask you to move to the economy section." Nathan closed his book slowly and met her gaze. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe there's a mistake. This is the seat assigned to me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've checked the system, and your seat doesn't appear to be valid for this cabin." Nathan remained composed. "I'd like to see the system you're referencing, as my ticket clearly states 2A in first class." Her voice sharpened. "Sir, I'm asking you to comply for the sake of the boarding process. We can sort this out after takeoff." Nathan leaned back in his seat, unruffled. "I'm happy to discuss it after takeoff, but I'm not moving. This is my seat." By now, the quiet hum of the cabin had shifted into an audible tension. Passengers murmured among themselves, and a man across the aisle subtly raised his phone, its camera lens trained on the unfolding confrontation. Linda's jaw tightened. "If you refuse to move, I'll have to involve the supervisor." "You're welcome to," Nathan said, his voice steady. Moments later, the cabin supervisor appeared, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a tablet in hand. His demeanor was calm but authoritative. "Good afternoon, sir. I understand there's some confusion about your seat. May I take a look at your boarding pass?" Nathan handed over the ticket without hesitation. The supervisor compared it to his tablet, scrolling through the manifest. After a moment, he nodded. "This seat is assigned to Mr. Ellis." "There's no mistake." Linda's face flushed. "Are you sure? I checked earlier, and it seemed—" "Unsure," the supervisor interrupted, his voice firm. "Mr. Ellis is entitled to this seat. Let's move forward with the boarding process." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin as Linda stepped back, her expression a mix of frustration and embarrassment. Nathan resumed his reading, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. The supervisor turned to Linda. "Let's ensure the rest of the passengers are settled. We're already behind schedule." Linda nodded curtly and retreated to the galley, her movements stiff. Passengers exchanged knowing looks, some quietly supportive of Nathan, others disapproving of the spectacle. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, Linda's frustration simmered in the galley. She whispered harshly to a younger attendant, her words tinged with bitterness. "He doesn't belong in first class, no matter what his ticket says." The younger attendant hesitated. "Maybe we should just let it go." The supervisor confirmed everything. Linda's eyes narrowed. "I'm not letting this slide." In the cabin, the man across the aisle who had been filming sent his footage to a friend with a caption, "Flight drama. First-class seat dispute spiraling out of control. Stay tuned." The plane had yet to leave the ground, but the seeds of a larger storm had already been sown. The storm brewing. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the initial tension that had gripped the cabin seemed to dissipate. The faint hum of the engines replaced the earlier whispers, and passengers turned their focus to the in-flight entertainment, books, or casual conversations. But the calm was deceptive, a facade that barely masked the storm brewing beneath the surface. Nathan Ellis sat in his seat, a picture of quiet resolve. His book lay open in his lap, though he wasn't reading anymore. His sharp mind replayed the earlier interaction, analyzing every word, every gesture. It wasn't the inconvenience that bothered him. It was the principle of the matter. He had experienced subtle biases before, but this was different. This was blatant and in plain view of everyone. Yet he remained calm, understanding the power of patience and timing. Across the aisle, the passenger who had recorded the confrontation tapped furiously on their phone. They whispered to their seatmate, "This is going viral. People need to see how he handled it, and how she kept pushing for no reason." Their companion nodded, leaning closer to view the footage. She was out of line. It's like she had a personal vendetta. In the galley, Linda was anything but calm. The supervisor's stern words echoed in her mind, but her anger overrode her better judgment. She felt cornered, embarrassed in front of the passengers and undermined by her own colleague. To her, Nathan wasn't just a passenger. He was a challenge to her authority, a reminder of her own insecurities. Leaning against the counter, she whispered harshly to another flight attendant, "You saw the way he acted, didn't you? Like he's untouchable. I've been doing this job for years, and I know when someone doesn't belong." The younger flight attendant looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe it's best to let it go, Linda." The supervisor already cleared him. Linda's face hardened. "You don't understand. If I let this slide, it sets a precedent. Passengers will think they can walk all over us." The younger attendant said nothing, her focus shifting to the cart she was organizing. Linda took a deep breath, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Back in the first-class cabin, the tension lingered. Though the supervisor had declared the issue resolved, the atmosphere remained charged. Several passengers cast glances at Nathan, some out of curiosity, others out of solidarity. A middle-aged woman seated across the aisle leaned over, speaking softly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to go through that. It wasn't right." Nathan offered a polite nod, his expression measured. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Her tone grew more indignant. "You handled it with such dignity. I don't know if I could have stayed so calm." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes calm is the loudest response. The exchange didn't go unnoticed. A man in the row behind them, a businessman judging by his crisp suit and briefcase, leaned forward. "If it means anything, I'm on your side too." What she did was uncalled for. Nathan nodded again, appreciating the quiet support, but not engaging further. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about something larger. His response would set the tone for how this incident was remembered, both by the passengers on this flight and potentially by a much wider audience. As the flight continued, Linda couldn't resist making her presence known. She walked through the first-class cabin under the pretense of checking on passengers, her eyes lingering on Nathan's seat. Each time she passed, she felt her resentment grow. He wasn't flustered, wasn't agitated. He was unshakable. That infuriated her more than anything. At one point, she stopped near his seat. "Is everything satisfactory here, sir?" she asked, her tone dripping with forced politeness. Nathan looked up from his book, his expression neutral. "Everything's fine. Thank you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Let us know if there's anything we can do to improve your experience," she said, her words carrying an edge. Nathan didn't respond, returning his gaze to his book. Linda moved on, but her frustration was palpable. Meanwhile, in the economy section, whispers about the incident had spread. A passenger who had overheard the earlier confrontation recounted the story to their seatmate. "I was walking past first class when I saw the attendant practically scolding him. It didn't make sense. He was just sitting there, minding his own business." Another passenger chimed in. "I heard she tried to move him to economy even though his ticket was valid. It's ridiculous." As word spread, so did the sense of unease. People pulled out their phones, searching for updates or sharing their own accounts. The recording passenger's video, uploaded to social media shortly after takeoff, was already gaining traction. Comments poured in, with strangers weighing in on the incident. "Unbelievable. This kind of behavior shouldn't happen in 2025. Kudos to the passenger for keeping his cool. That attendant needs training or a new job. Let's see if the airline actually does something about this." Linda wasn't aware of the brewing storm outside the plane, but the buzz inside the cabin was hard to ignore. Passengers whispered, glanced at her, and occasionally shook their heads in disapproval. The atmosphere was no longer just tense, it was judgmental. By the time the plane began its descent, the situation had escalated far beyond Linda's control. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, please ensure your seat belts are fastened and all carry-on items are stowed securely." Nathan secured his belongings and sat back, his expression calm but alert. He had noticed Linda's repeated glances and sensed her growing agitation. He wasn't sure what her next move would be, but he knew the power had shifted. She no longer held the authority in this situation. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Linda's heart raced. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing fear. The supervisor's warning, the passenger's murmurs, the recording, it all felt like a noose tightening around her. When the doors opened and passengers began to disembark, Linda's dread reached its peak. Two uniformed airline representatives stepped onto the plane, their expressions serious. They exchanged words with the supervisor, who gestured toward the galley. "Linda," the supervisor said, his tone clipped. "Ground operations needs to speak with you." Linda swallowed hard, nodding stiffly. As she walked toward the exit, she avoided eye contact with the passengers, but their disapproving murmurs followed her like a shadow. Nathan stood, retrieving his carry-on bag. He glanced toward the galley, where Linda was being escorted off the plane. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet determination. This wasn't the end of the story, for her or for him. A wider audience. As the passengers streamed off the plane and into the bustling terminal, the tension that had gripped the flight began to dissipate for most. Travelers checked their phones, scrolled through social media, and hurried toward their connecting gates. But for Nathan Ellis, the weight of the incident lingered. He moved through the terminal with purpose, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Nathan had barely reached the baggage claim when his phone buzzed. A notification popped up from an unfamiliar number. Opening the message, he saw an email with the subject line, "Urgent follow-up regarding flight incident." It was from a senior representative of the airline's customer relations team. Dear Mr. Ellis, we are deeply sorry for the events you experienced during your recent flight. Please know that we take this matter very seriously and have already begun an internal review. We would like to invite you to share your account directly with our leadership team to ensure this is addressed thoroughly. Please find attached a direct contact for any further correspondence. We are committed to making this right. Sincerely, Jessica Lang, Senior Director, Customer Relations. Nathan exhaled slowly. While the message was professional and appropriately apologetic, he knew it was only the beginning. Apologies were easy. Accountability and systemic change were the real tests. As he grabbed his suitcase from the carousel, Nathan noticed a small cluster of people near the exit. Passengers from the same flight. A middle-aged woman approached him hesitantly, her face a mix of indignation and empathy. Mr. Ellis, she asked, her voice soft but resolute. He turned, offering a polite nod. Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say how impressed I was with how you handled yourself back there. That attendant was out of line, and you stayed so composed. It's not something a lot of people could have done. Nathan gave her a faint smile. Thank you. I appreciate your support. The woman's tone sharpened slightly, her indignation bubbling to the surface. You shouldn't have had to go through that. I've already emailed the airline to file a complaint. People need to be held accountable for this kind of behavior. Nathan nodded again. I'm grateful for your advocacy. Hopefully, this incident will lead to meaningful changes. As the woman walked away, Nathan noticed another passenger lingering nearby, the same person who had recorded the confrontation on the plane. They approached, their phone in hand. Mr. Ellis, they said, their tone cautious. I'm the one who recorded what happened earlier. I just wanted to let you know that I shared the video on social media. People are already reacting to it. It's blowing up. I hope you're okay with that. Nathan paused, weighing his response. He understood the power of public accountability, but he also valued his privacy. Finally, he said, thank you for standing up in the moment. The attention this is getting might help ensure the right changes are made. The passenger nodded, visibly relieved. I just felt like someone needed to speak up. You handled it better than I would have. Anyway, if you need access to the footage or anything, just let me know. They exchanged contact information, and Nathan walked toward the airport exit. The cool evening air hit him as he stepped outside, a welcome contrast to the heated atmosphere of the past few hours. His car service was already waiting at the curb. The driver, a courteous man in his late 40s, greeted him with a warm smile. Good evening, sir. Rough day. Nathan chuckled lightly, sliding into the back seat. You could say that. As the car pulled away from the terminal, Nathan opened his phone and began drafting an email. He addressed it to the airline's senior leadership, including Jessica Lang and several executives whose names he had found on the company's website. Subject: Incident on Flight 472. Request for systemic change. Dear leadership team, I'm writing to address the unacceptable treatment I experienced during my recent flight. While I appreciate the apology I received, it's clear this incident reflects deeper issues within your organization. What occurred was not just an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of systemic bias and a lack of effective training. Addressing this requires more than individual accountability. It demands structural change. I request a detailed outline of the steps your airline plans to take to prevent similar incidents in the future. This should include mandatory training on bias and de-escalation for all staff, as well as a transparent review process for passenger complaints. Please confirm when I can expect a response and provide a timeline for implementing these changes. Sincerely, Nathan Ellis. Satisfied, Nathan hit send and leaned back against the seat. He knew the email would set the tone for the discussions to come. This wasn't just about him. It was about holding a corporation accountable for its culture and practices. Meanwhile, at the airline's corporate headquarters. At the airline's sleek, modern office in downtown Chicago, A crisis management meeting was already underway. Executives crowded around a long conference table, their expressions grim as they reviewed the video footage that had gone viral. The recording was displayed on a large screen, showing Linda confronting Nathan in the first-class cabin. Her tone was curt, her body language defensive, and the passengers' reactions were clear indicators of growing discomfort. When the video ended, the room fell silent. The head of customer relations, Jessica Lang, was the first to speak. "This is a PR disaster waiting to happen," she said bluntly. "If we don't get ahead of this, it's going to spiral out of control." A senior executive nodded. "We've already received hundreds of complaints, and the video has over 50,000 views in just 2 hours. The hashtags #RespectPassengers and #AirlineBias are trending. We need a strategy now." The CEO, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward. "What are we doing about the flight attendant?" "Linda, is it? Has she been suspended?" Jessica replied, "Yes. She's been taken off duty pending a full investigation. Ground Control has already conducted an initial interview, and we've informed her union representative." The CEO's gaze hardened. "Good. But this isn't just about one employee. This incident has exposed gaps in our training and our culture. I want a comprehensive action plan on my desk by tomorrow morning. That includes mandatory bias training, a review of our escalation protocols, and a public statement outlining our commitment to change." Another executive chimed in. "What about the passenger, Mr. Ellis? Have we reached out to him?" Jessica nodded. "I've already sent him an email and invited him to meet with us directly. He seems focused on systemic change rather than personal compensation, which could work in our favor." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "Or against us, if he decides to take legal action or involve the media. This could get a lot worse." Back in the terminal, Linda sat in a stark, windowless room with 2 members of the airline's ground operations team. Her confidence, so apparent earlier in the day, had evaporated entirely. She twisted her hands nervously in her lap as the team members reviewed their notes. "Linda," one of them began, their tone calm but firm, "we've reviewed the reports, passenger accounts, and the video footage. It's clear that your actions violated multiple policies." She opened her mouth to respond, but the other team member cut her off. "Before you say anything, understand this is a formal review. You'll have a chance to provide your side, but the evidence against you is substantial." Linda's voice trembled. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was just trying to do my job." The first team member sighed. "Your job doesn't include singling out passengers without cause, escalating situations unnecessarily, or disrupting the entire cabin. We're suspending you from duty effective immediately, pending further investigation." Linda felt the weight of their words like a physical blow. She nodded numbly, her mind racing with regret and fear. As they dismissed her, she left the room, clutching her bag tightly. Her career, the identity she had built over years, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The public backlash. By the time Nathan arrived home, the video had reached over 100,000 views and was being picked up by news outlets. Headlines like "Passenger Confronted Over First-Class Seats Sparks Airline Accountability Debate" and "Flight Drama. Bias at 30,000 feet" dominated social media. Nathan's inbox was flooded with messages, some from reporters seeking interviews, others from strangers expressing support. He took a deep breath, knowing that his decision on how to respond would shape the narrative going forward. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. A call for justice. As the video of Nathan's confrontation with the flight attendant spread like wildfire across social media, it became a rallying cry for thousands. People shared their own stories of being mistreated, judged, or unfairly targeted in similar situations. The hashtags #PassengerJustice and #AirlineBias surge, with activists, public figures, and even politicians weighing in on the debate. Nathan Ellis, however, remained silent. For now. Nathan's decision. Seated in his modest Brooklyn apartment, Nathan sifted through the flood of emails and messages on his phone. His inbox was filled with inquiries, journalists requesting interviews, advocacy groups offering support, and strangers sharing their stories. He leaned back on the couch, his laptop balanced on his lap, and opened an email from a civil rights organization. Subject: Support for your stand against airline bias. Dear Mr. Ellis, we saw the viral video of your recent experience with the airline and wanted to commend you for your composure and strength. Incidents like this highlight a systemic issue that requires urgent attention. Our organization focuses on addressing systemic bias in corporate America, and we believe your story has the potential to spark meaningful change. If you're open to it, we'd like to work with you to advocate for reforms, both within the airline industry and beyond. Please let us know if you'd be willing to discuss further. With respect, Angela Rivera, Director, Equal Treatment Coalition. Nathan closed the email, exhaling deeply. While he appreciated the support, he wasn't sure if he wanted to become a public figure for this cause. He valued his privacy, and the idea of being thrust into the spotlight made him uneasy. But as he thought back to the stares of the passengers, the murmurs of disbelief, and the quiet solidarity he'd received, he realized this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been treated as if they didn't belong. Setting his laptop aside, Nathan grabbed his phone and dialed his best friend, Terrence, a law professor and someone he trusted for advice. "Hey, Nate," Terrence answered, his voice warm but concerned. "I saw the video. How are you holding up?" Nathan chuckled dryly. "Well, I'm not used to being famous. It's a strange feeling knowing thousands of people have opinions about something that happened to you." Terrence's tone grew serious. "You handled it better than most people would have. But this is bigger than you now. Have you thought about what you want to do?" "I have," Nathan replied, pacing the room. "I want to push for real change, not just apologies or a refund. Those are superficial. I want the airline to address its culture, its training, and its policies. But I also don't want to be the guy who becomes a hashtag and then fades away." Terrence's voice softened. "You don't have to do it alone, Nate. Partner with the right people. Advocacy groups, legal teams. You have the power to make a difference, and you've already shown you're capable of handling this with grace. Just make sure you control the narrative." Nathan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right. It's time to take action." The airline's reaction. At the airline's corporate headquarters, the situation was rapidly escalating. The senior leadership team had convened yet another emergency meeting as the video climbed past 500,000 views and began trending on mainstream news platforms. Jessica Lang, the head of customer relations, stood at the front of the conference room, a slideshow of metrics and public reactions projected behind her. "The feedback we're getting is overwhelmingly negative," she began. "Customers are calling for boycotts, and our reputation is taking a significant hit. We need to act decisively." The CEO leaned forward, her expression stern. "What's the current status of Linda, the flight attendant involved?" Jessica flipped to another slide. "She's been suspended pending a full investigation. We've also begun reaching out to the other passengers on the flight for their statements." Another executive chimed in. "What about Mr. Ellis? Have we spoken to him?" Jessica nodded. "Yes, I sent him a formal apology and offered to discuss the matter further. He's responded with a request for systemic changes within our organization. He's not looking for compensation. He's asking for accountability." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of Nathan's request sank in. The CEO finally spoke. "Good. That means he's not after a payday. But it also means we can't brush this under the rug. We need to meet with him directly. Jessica, arrange it." As the meeting adjourned, the CEO remained seated, deep in thought. She knew this was a pivotal moment for the airline, not just a PR crisis, but an opportunity to prove they were capable of real change. The interview request. The next morning, Nathan woke to find an email from one of the largest news networks in the country. The subject line caught his attention immediately. Exclusive interview opportunity. He opened it and read, "Dear Mr. Ellis, we've been following the story of your recent flight and the viral video that has sparked widespread discussion. We believe your perspective is essential in addressing the broader issues of bias and discrimination in corporate spaces. We'd like to invite you for an exclusive in-depth interview on our primetime program. This platform will give you the opportunity to share your story and advocate for change on a national level. Please let us know if you're interested. Sincerely, Rachel Kane, Executive Producer, Insight Tonight." Nathan stared at the email, conflicted. While the opportunity was tempting, he worried about how his words might be twisted or taken out of context. He needed to ensure the focus remained on the issue, not on him as an individual. He called Terrence again to weigh his options. "What do you think, T? Should I do it?" Terrence's response was immediate. "Absolutely. But only if you go in prepared. Speak to an attorney or a media advisor first. Make sure you control the narrative. This is your chance to amplify your voice." Nathan nodded. "You're right. I'll reach out to Angela Rivera at the Equal Treatment Coalition. They offered to help, and this might be the right time to bring them on board." Linda's reckoning. While Nathan prepared for his next steps, Linda sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. The video of her confrontation with Nathan was everywhere. The comments were brutal, with people calling for her termination and accusing her of discrimination. Her stomach churned as she read the words. This is exactly what's wrong with customer service today. How do people like her get hired in the first place? She needs to be fired, no question. Linda's phone buzzed with a call from her union representative. "Linda," the voice on the other end said firmly, "we need to talk. The airline is conducting a formal investigation, and it's not looking good. Have you prepared your statement?" Linda hesitated. "I don't know what to say. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just doing my job." The representative's tone softened slightly. "Then say that. Be honest. But understand, there's a good chance you'll face disciplinary action, and this might be bigger than the airline itself. You'll need to be ready for that." As the call ended, Linda felt the walls closing in around her. She had spent years building her career, and now it was unraveling before her eyes. For the first time, she truly grasped the gravity of her actions, not just for her own future, but for the culture she had contributed to. Preparing for the fight ahead. That evening, Nathan sat at his desk, drafting his talking points for the interview. He outlined key issues he wanted to address: the need for better training, the importance of de-escalation, and the broader implications of systemic bias in corporate spaces. He also drafted a list of actionable changes he wanted to see from the airline. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela Rivera. "Looking forward to working with you. Let's make this count." Nathan replied simply, "Absolutely." As he closed his notebook and prepared for bed, Nathan felt a sense of resolve. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about creating a world where no one would ever have to face the kind of treatment he did, and he was ready to see it through. The battle for change. The next few days were a whirlwind for Nathan Ellis. What had started as a tense flight experience had exploded into a national conversation. News outlets ran segments on the video. Civil rights groups voiced their support, and the airline faced mounting pressure to address not just the incident, but the larger systemic issues it revealed. Nathan found himself at the center of a movement he hadn't planned to lead but now felt compelled to guide. The Equal Treatment Coalition steps in. Nathan met with Angela Rivera, the director of the Equal Treatment Coalition, ETC, at their downtown Manhattan office. The space was bright and modern, with walls adorned with posters bearing slogans like "Equal Treatment Everywhere" and "Change Starts with Accountability." Angela, a dynamic woman in her early 40s, greeted Nathan warmly. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for coming. It's an honor to meet you. Please, call me Nathan," he said with a smile, shaking her hand. And thank you for reaching out. I'm here because I want to make sure this moment leads to something meaningful." Angela nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "That's why we're here. The video of your flight has struck a chord with people, but viral moments come and go. If we want this to create real change, we need a strategy." Nathan leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't want this to just be about me. This is about addressing the biases and assumptions that so many people face every day. Whether it's on a plane, in the workplace, or anywhere else, the airline needs to do more than issue an apology. They need to set an example." Angela smiled. "I couldn't agree more. We've drafted a proposal for systemic changes we want to see from the airline. Mandatory bias training for all staff, clear protocols for handling disputes, and a commitment to transparency in addressing passenger complaints." She slid a folder across the table. "Take a look. If you're on board, we'll present this to the airline together. Your voice carries weight in this fight." Nathan reviewed the document carefully. The recommendations were thorough and practical, addressing the root causes of incidents like his. He nodded. "This is exactly the kind of change we need. Let's do it." The interview that shifted the narrative. Later that week, Nathan sat across from Rachel Kane, the host of Insight Tonight, in a sleek studio. Bright lights illuminated the set, and the cameras focused on him. Rachel, a seasoned journalist known for her incisive interviews, smiled warmly. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for joining us," she began. "Your experience on that flight has sparked a national conversation about bias and accountability. Can you walk us through what happened?" Nathan recounted the events calmly and clearly, focusing on the facts rather than emotion. He described the flight attendant's assumptions, the escalation despite his valid ticket, and the eventual resolution by the supervisor. As he spoke, clips from the viral video played on a screen behind him, illustrating his account. Rachel leaned forward. "You've been praised for how you handled the situation, with calmness and dignity. But many people are asking, what do you want to see happen now?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "This isn't about punishing one person. It's about addressing the system that allowed this to happen. I want the airline to implement mandatory bias training, establish clear protocols for handling disputes, and make their policies more transparent. This is about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did." Rachel nodded. "The airline has issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising an internal review. Do you think that's enough?" "Words are a start," Nathan said, his tone measured, "but actions speak louder. An apology without action is just damage control. Real accountability means committing to change and following through." The interview ended with Rachel praising Nathan's composure and leadership. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for sharing your story and for pushing for change. We'll be following this closely." Corporate tensions at the airline. Back at the airline's headquarters, the leadership team watched Nathan's interview intently. The CEO, who had been quietly supportive of Nathan's push for change, turned to her senior executives. "He's right," she said firmly. "We've been reactive for too long. It's time to lead the industry in addressing bias and accountability." Jessica Lang, the head of customer relations, nodded. "We've already begun drafting a plan for mandatory training and new dispute resolution protocols, but it's going to take time to implement." The CEO's gaze hardened. "Then we start now. We can't afford to wait. Schedule a meeting with Mr. Ellis and the Equal Treatment Coalition. I want this to be a collaborative effort." One executive hesitated. "What about the flight attendant?" "The public is demanding action." The CEO sighed. "Linda's actions were unacceptable, and she's been suspended pending investigation. But this isn't just about her. If we scapegoat one employee and ignore the larger issues, we've failed." Linda's reflection. In a modest apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pile of unopened mail in front of her. Her suspension had left her with too much time to think. The once proud flight attendant now felt like a pariah, her name synonymous with discrimination and poor judgment. She scrolled through her phone, unable to resist checking the latest headlines about the incident. Each article, each comment section, felt like another blow. People didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a symbol of everything wrong with customer service. Her phone buzzed with a call from her union representative. She hesitated before answering. "Linda, it's me." The voice on the other end said, "We've reviewed the evidence, and the airline has made it clear they're taking this seriously. You'll need to attend a formal hearing next week." Linda's voice trembled. "Do I even stand a chance?" The representative sighed. "I won't lie to you. It doesn't look good. But if you're honest about what happened and show a willingness to learn, they might give you a second chance. This is bigger than just you now." After the call ended, Linda sat in silence, grappling with the consequences of her actions. For the first time, she truly understood the harm she had caused, not just to Nathan, but to the passengers who had witnessed the incident and the company she had represented. The meeting for change. Nathan arrived at the airline's corporate offices accompanied by Angela Rivera. They were greeted by Jessica Lange and several senior executives. The atmosphere was tense but professional. "We appreciate you coming in, Mr. Ellis," Jessica began. "We're here to listen and work with you to ensure meaningful changes are made." Nathan nodded. "Thank you. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to help fix a broken system." Angela laid out the coalition's recommendations, detailing the need for mandatory bias training, clear protocols for handling disputes, and transparent reporting of passenger complaints. The executives listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. The CEO spoke up. "These are solid recommendations, and we're committed to implementing them. But we also want to hear from you, Mr. Ellis. What do you believe is the most critical change we need to make?" Nathan's response was immediate. "Accountability. Not just for employees, but for the culture you foster. This isn't about avoiding bad press. It's about building trust with your customers and your staff." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Finally, the CEO extended her hand. "We're committed to making this right. Let's work together to set a new standard for the industry." A movement begins. As Nathan left the meeting, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. The airline had promised to take action, and with the Equal Treatment Coalition by his side, he believed they could hold the company accountable. But the fight wasn't over. The video, the interviews, and the public outcry had sparked a larger movement, a call for fairness, dignity, and respect in all spaces. Nathan knew this was only the beginning, but he was ready to see it through. The world was watching, and he intended to make it count. The dawn of change. The weeks that followed Nathan Ellis's meeting with the airline's executives were a whirlwind of progress, reflection, and momentum. What had started as an unfortunate incident on a flight had grown into a catalyst for systemic change, not just within the airline, but across industries grappling with accountability and fairness. For Nathan, the journey had become more than personal. It was now about ensuring that his stand made a lasting impact. The airline's plan unveiled. The airline moved swiftly to repair its reputation and demonstrate its commitment to meaningful change. A press conference was announced, hosted in a sleek conference hall at their headquarters. The CEO, Jessica Lange, and other senior executives took the stage, flanked by representatives from the Equal Treatment Coalition, including Nathan and Angela Rivera. Cameras flashed as reporters jotted down notes, ready to dissect every word. The CEO opened with a somber acknowledgement. "Today, we're here to address an incident that has sparked a necessary conversation about bias and accountability, not just within our airline, but in how we treat one another as a society." She outlined a comprehensive action plan, detailing the changes the airline would implement. Mandatory bias and sensitivity training. Every employee, from executives to frontline staff, would undergo regular training designed to identify and address unconscious bias, improve communication, and prevent discriminatory behavior. Enhanced escalation protocols. Clear, enforceable guidelines for handling disputes with passengers, focusing on de-escalation and fairness, would be rolled out across the organization. Transparency in complaints. A new reporting system would allow passengers to file complaints directly, with clear timelines for resolution and visibility into outcomes. Passenger advocates. The airline would employ independent passenger advocates to ensure customer concerns were handled impartially. External Review Board. A third-party panel, including representatives from civil rights organizations, would oversee the implementation of these policies and provide accountability. The CEO then turned to Nathan, who stepped forward to address the room. Nathan's voice. Nathan adjusted the microphone and took a moment to meet the gaze of the audience. This isn't just about one flight or one passenger. It's about the assumptions we make about people and how those assumptions shape our actions. It's about building systems that prioritize respect, fairness, and dignity for everyone. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I commend the airline for taking this first step, but this is only the beginning. Change isn't just a checklist. It's a commitment that has to be renewed every day. And while policies are important, they mean nothing without the culture to support them. The room erupted into applause, the sincerity in Nathan's voice resonating with those present. As he stepped back, Angela took the microphone to underscore the Equal Treatment Coalition's ongoing involvement in the process, ensuring transparency and accountability. Linda's reckoning. Meanwhile, Linda sat alone in her small apartment, watching the press conference on her television. Her suspension had turned into a termination, a decision communicated to her in a formal letter from the airline. While the letter cited her actions on the flight as a violation of company policy, Linda knew the damage went deeper than a single incident. For weeks, she had struggled with the public fallout, reading scathing comments on social media, and watching herself become a symbol of bias. But now, as she watched Nathan speak, something shifted within her. His words about assumptions and dignity hit harder than she expected. She saw herself in a new light, not as a victim of public outrage, but as someone who had contributed to a problem she didn't fully understand. For the first time, Linda decided to take responsibility. She signed up for a bias awareness workshop offered by a local nonprofit, not because anyone forced her to, but because she wanted to understand how her actions could harm others. It was a small step, but it was hers. The movement grows. The press conference was only the beginning. The changes promised by the airline spurred conversations in other industries. Advocacy groups used the momentum to push for similar policies in corporate spaces, schools, hospitals, and beyond. The hashtag #ChangeTakeAFlight began trending, symbolizing the broader movement Nathan's story had ignited. Nathan, now partnered with the Equal Treatment Coalition, became a reluctant public figure. Though he hadn't sought the spotlight, he used his platform carefully, advocating for systemic reforms and sharing stories from others who had experienced similar biases. His measured, thoughtful approach earned him respect, even from skeptics. He appeared on panels, participated in discussions, and worked behind the scenes to hold the airline and other organizations accountable. Each day brought new challenges, but Nathan faced them with the same calm determination he had shown on the flight. A personal turning point. One evening, as Nathan returned to his Brooklyn apartment, he found a handwritten letter waiting for him. The envelope was plain, and the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside, he found a note from Linda. Dear Mr. Ellis, I don't know if you'll read this, but I feel I owe you an apology. Watching the press conference today, I realized how much harm my actions caused, not just to you, but to everyone who witnessed what happened. I've spent weeks trying to justify what I did, but the truth is, I acted out of ignorance and assumptions. You didn't deserve that, and I'm deeply sorry. I've started taking steps to educate myself and do better, not because I expect forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do. Thank you for standing up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly. I hope your efforts lead to the change we all need. Sincerely, Linda. Nathan read the letter twice, his emotions a mix of surprise and quiet validation. He set it on the table, reflecting on how far the journey had taken him, not just in holding others accountable, but in inspiring personal growth, even in those who had wronged him. A legacy of accountability. Months later, the airline released its first annual transparency report, detailing the changes implemented since the incident. The report included data on training completion, passenger complaint resolution times, and feedback from the external review board. True to their promise, they worked closely with Nathan and the Equal Treatment Coalition to ensure the changes weren't just performative, but deeply embedded in the organization's culture. Nathan's story became a